Yep.
Oh, I thought you were going to say hi. So on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the US. During 1 year, that equates to more than 10 million women and men. That number is so staggering. That's why I wanted to bring that up. A few more facts: 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner contact, sexual violence, and/or intimate partner stalking, which with impacts such as injury, fearfulness, post-traumatic stress disorder, use of victim services, and contraction of sexually transmitted diseases. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence, beating, burning, strangling by an intimate partner in their lifetime. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked by their intimate partner. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence hotline nationwide. We're talking about the US. The presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%, which is something I'll talk to in a minute. Intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crimes. Women between the ages of 18 to 24 are more commonly abused by an intimate partner. 19% of domestic violence involves a weapon. Domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior. And only 34% of people who are injured by intimate partners receive medical care for their injuries. That is just some of the statistics on this. So these numbers are staggering. And of course, they are so much less than what really happens, because people who are in this situation are too afraid to say anything. So, the two things that I wanted to say was, unfortunately, my mother was in that situation where a gun was always present, and my mother was murdered by my father. He shot her in the head back in 1995. And then on top of that, went on to move in with very quickly and then married my aunt, my mother's sister. He went to prison for only 2.5 years out of a 5-year sentence, which was a plea bargain, because the gun was cleaned up. My father had, connections in Brooklyn that there were 8 hours before the police were called, and the gun that was used to kill my mom, the gun I learned to shoot on, ironically, because we shot together as a family, as a pastime. It was like guns were fun until they were not. And that gun, and he had other guns, everything was gone 8 hours before the police were called. And then my father did not speak to them. He had a lawyer in place. And then when he did get out of prison, my brother and I made the decision to take him to court for wrongful death. And we won a $2 million judgment, and he skipped town, and I didn't pay, and we never saw him again. So, so that's something that I have been, healing from my entire life. And I've been actually speaking about it for the past around 15 years by way of a one-person show that helped me one of the ways that helped me heal from the trauma. And after my mother died is when I actually started doing research onto domestic violence, because until that time, I didn't even know it was domestic violence, and I didn't know my place in it as a family member, because that was just my family, and there wasn't, my father wasn't beating my mother up. There were threats of guns though, and even after my mom died, when I had talked to someone, I remember them saying, "Oh, well, that wasn't domestic violence because there was, a fear of guns." But of course it is, just because someone's not punched. So, yeah. So those are some of the statistics. And I myself was in, I don't think that's right English, but correct English, but I was in a relationship in my late 20s that was the beginning of domestic violence. You know, he choked me, but that it had escalated to that point. And I remember I stayed 3 months, and I was terrified of him, but I was thankfully able to leave after that. That's the one relationship I had like that. So you just wonder how many people have had relationships like that, or some part of it, but we try to justify and stuff like that. A lot of people try to justify.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I've tried to write down the stats as you were going through them, and I'm really shocked. It's just so much, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, as you said. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is just the people that report. There's going to be a higher number of people that don't report. But I was also, I can't remember which stats it was, but one of the ones you mentioned was that actually there wasn't much of a difference between the male and female. I think female were 4% and the male were 7%. But it's not talked about at all.
Oh, that was the emotional abuse. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's even harder in some ways for men to come forward because there's such a stigma around that. But there is a lot of abuse to men as well. Yeah, there's a lot of abuse to men as well.
Yeah.
I tend to think that, with women, it's just, we are, for the most part, smaller in stature, and just men are more physically strong and stuff like that. But there's a lot of abuse the other way as well. There are some other stats here that I thought could read as well. I don't even know how they work this out, but it says the cost of intimate partner violence exceeds $8.3 billion per year. 21 to 60% of victims of intimate partner violence lose their jobs due to reasons stemming from abuse. I know that I was working with someone for a while that was not showing up on the calls, and like a year later, this person told me that they were in a abusive relationship, so they couldn't get on the calls. So that was like, oh my God, like you never know what someone's going through. And that's also why I have performed my show, my Brooklyn Hamlet, so much and all over the world. And why, thank you for inviting me here. I will talk about this endlessly, is because you really don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And when I've done my live events, I have, like last night, even there was someone that came over to me after I was on a forgiveness panel last night. Someone came over in the audience and was like, and she was with her husband, who was wonderful. And she said, oh, I was in a domestic violence relationship. And then her husband's like, it wasn't me, but it was like, people are living with so much trauma, you wouldn't even know, part of their past. And I know for me, I was so secretive about what happened to my family in the beginning with my family, because I felt like damaged goods. I felt like, somehow I wish to be shameful and stuff like that. So that's why I talk about this too. And self-forgiveness, of course, how I was able to get to that place.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because that's not easy. That's, for me, I found it incredibly challenging. I think, I was filled with so much anger. I just wanted to get a baseball bat and smash up whatever I could smash up. It was only later when I realized that actually the forgiveness wasn't so much for them, it was for me. Right.
You made a really good point there, that, pretty much half the time people will be angry and want to lash out, like so effing angry at the world, at the person. I definitely went through the stage of revenge fantasies and killing my father. I did in the very beginning. I was so full of pain that I was just like, why couldn't he have killed himself after he killed her? And then I had a poem where I, put a gun to his head, which in a lot of ways it was healthy for me to at least exorcise that out of my body. But I actually was someone who the anger was, I said, it went in versus out. So I would overeat, I would over exercise and then hurt myself. And the overeating would be that then I would gain weight and I'd be so mad at myself, another reason to hate myself. But I was then, my energy, my emotion, my focus was going on to the overeating and why was I out of control instead of my father killed my mother. That's like appropriate to be angry at. I had this moment where I realized this was where the real shift came for me. First of all, yes, it was shocking that I had to forgive myself. What I realized is that I was so mad at myself for ever trusting him. And then it was like, well, of course I trusted him. He was my father. So for people who, you're in that relationship and you fell in love, people who love you aren't supposed to hurt you. And then when you get that, it's natural to like be upset with yourself. But that's the time. And I think that's why people don't forgive themselves. It's like they don't want to like look at that because they beat themselves up more, instead of like using, whenever you have an experience like that, use that to pour love into yourself. If you knew better, you would have done better, right? You trusted this person. Like when I went out with that guy in my 20s, oh my God, he put me up on a pedestal. The bad part about that is I needed to be put up on a pedestal by someone. So that was very inviting for me. Like, oh my God, look how he's treating me. But of course, it came from not having my own foundation of self-love and stuff like that. So the key is, to look at what you didn't see and then love yourself. And I did a lot of inner child work so that I could just, because if we're beating up on ourselves, right? Or if we're lashing out at other people, we can't feel good about ourselves because we're still not getting what we want. What we want is to be heard, loved, seen, and for that person to take responsibility, right? And if that's not happening, it's going to be it's momentary that you feel good or high, right? When you're angry at the person. So it really is a call back to, it's all an inside job. Okay, I didn't see it. Okay, I love the person. I forgive myself for judging myself as stupid for trusting my father, and then reframing it, not too soon because then it's spiritual bypass, but reframing to, the truth is, he's my dad. Of course I would love him and trust him. That's how we're brought up in this society. And I love myself anyway. And then I had this moment where I realized that because I got a 2-year master's degree in spiritual psychology, where I learned the foundation of how to forgive myself. And I could not actually forgive myself until I set a healthy boundary. And with that, I took my dad to court for wrongful death, which then made him skip town. So that was an enforced boundary that I couldn't do at first. I would still call him from time to time. But I had this awareness. It was actually after I took him to court that I think it was after I took him to court that if I hated any part of him, I hated a part of myself. I really got the oneness, especially around our parents. And I just was like, it was like a light bulb moment that I was like, I am not going to hate myself anymore. I have to take this energy back and love myself. And then how can I get in and have compassion toward him? Not that I'm not even telling people you have to have compassion towards your abuser. This is what worked for me. And I have helped hundreds of people with my processes, but I'm also saying you don't have to do it, like go within. But for me, I found peace when I realized that when I can have compassion for him, but that's easier said than done. For me to find compassion for him, I had to picture him as a little boy. Like I had a picture of him when he was a little boy. I had to picture that, like when he was a little kid. I had to remember that he had a mother that was just horrible. I had to think, I thought about the fact that he had undiagnosed mental illness. Like those are the things. It was mostly that picture of him as a little boy before the personality set in and all that other stuff. That helped me to open my heart. And from that open place, any fear of my father went away. And I just had, it makes me cry. I just had pure compassion for him, because nobody kills someone or hurts someone unless they're really hurt. Not condoning ever what happened. He took the most precious thing from me, but it was a way in for me, because my heart was so closed when I was not forgiving of him or myself. It was so closed. All of a sudden, I broke up with my fiance back then, who thankfully was with me through that. But it's because I couldn't be seen in my grieving and my anger. I was so angry. I didn't want to be witnessed in it. And I pushed people away. And then when I did start dating, it was all people, they were all people who were emotionally vacant because I didn't want to be seen. So it was really only through this forgiveness work and self-forgiveness and loving myself and parenting myself that I learned to make healthy decisions and knew I could trust myself to connect with people who also were more filled with self-love, so that when you're filled with more self-love, you make better choices.
It's a real journey as well, isn't it? It's a real inner journey. I remember I got to this point, I'm not quite sure how I got there, but I got to this point of how can I keep someone else in so much pain, knowing what it is that they're going through and the pain it is they're experiencing. And somehow that thought that I had, how can I keep someone in so much pain, knowing, just allowed me to just forgive, just let it go.
What do you mean keep someone in so much pain?
So I wasn't keeping them in pain, but so my father wanted to reach out to me because he was allegedly dying.
I understand that when my father died, it was like he allegedly died, because I got a letter 30 days after he died. Yeah.
Allegedly was ill. And so he was reaching out through another family member. And, in the past, I would have wanted to get the baseball bat and like gone crazy. But in that moment, I was just like, okay, he's ill. How can I keep him in that emotional pain while he's ill? The emotional pain of him wanting to reach out and me rejecting him and saying no.
Oh.
So
it does make sense. It does. It makes sense.
And I was just like, let it go. You don't need to cause someone pain because you're angry, because you can.
It's really interesting, right? On an energetic level, because we're all connected. Like on the one hand, there's like, I can already hear people in my mind. I'm like, screw him, like like we're human. Like, even though I've been teaching forgiveness for all these years, I'm human. Like I have my moments, like, and they're appropriate. You know what I'm saying? So what did you do? Did you call him?
Well, he called me, but it didn't work out well in the end anyway. We just, But the fact that I could actually just let it go and just move into a completely different space and not be angry, because that it's so toxic. It's just not good for you.
For us, it's really more. Yeah, it's more for us that letting it go. On to it.
So it really wasn't about him. Well, apart from I didn't want to keep him in pain, but that's in my head. Obviously.
Right, it's in your head. It's
in my head.
But it's the impetus that got you to let go of it.
Yeah.
That's so great. Yeah, you said something interesting there about how it didn't go well with you and him. It didn't go well. So that's the kind of thing it really is a journey and levels of our awareness and levels of forgiveness, because, in when it first happened with my family, I was like, why won't he tell me what happened? Why won't he tell me what happened? Why won't he tell me he's lying? And then only years later, I'm like, well, of course he didn't tell me what happened. What good thing could have come out of him telling me, oh, this is exactly what happened and this is how I shot her? But my wish was that he would have remorse and regret and share in a way that I would feel like he was not, the person with lack of empathy and perhaps, a sociopath and all that stuff, a narcissist. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was not, like, I didn't know my father to be that, because I didn't know what those things were. He was just my father until what happened. Were there signs? Yes, there were definitely signs. But I mean, I feel like that's why this series is so important that you're doing, so that if you see these signs, you understand, or if you grew up in a household like us or something like that, that you're like, oh, I see, that's not normal. That's not the norm. And oh, I might have a trouble attracting the most wonderful people or something like that. Or I might have a challenge with an addiction because I haven't dealt with this, but that's not normal. Oh, okay. Let me get the care that I need.
Yeah, you're right. This is why this conversation is so important. What are some of the signs that people could look out for, do you think?
Some of the signs.
So there's some of the signs, yeah.
Yeah, some of the signs to look out for. Well, my parents fought a lot. My father, and I'm not saying it's one-sided, right? Because yes, everybody has their stuff, but he definitely was gaslighting her. I didn't really understand it. But why would you if you don't understand how people are treating each other? But he would do things like he'd leave money, an allowance for her back in the day. He'd leave money for her when he would leave the house for bills and shopping and this and that. And then the money wouldn't be there. And she'd be like, where's the money? And he'd be like, what's wrong with you? I left it right there. Like he would do things like that. And so growing up, I thought my mom was just real flighty. Like, oh, she just doesn't, because my dad was always so confident and this and that. But like, if I look at my mind, there are so many incidents like that where like something was supposed to go a certain way and it didn't. And then he was like, what's wrong with you? So gaslighting would be one thing. Like I felt guilty for a while because I felt like I believed my dad so much. You know what I'm saying? Like even the week before my mom died, I was living in California at the time. They were still in New York. They were in New York. And my mom called. This was the Wednesday before. My mom called me. It was like 6 a.m. Like she would always forget that I'm 3 hours later, but it was like 6 a.m. And she called and she was first she was fine. She was talking about how my father and her were going to get divorced, but that it was going to be really good. They were going to live together. Like it was an interesting conversation because they had a very passionate love-hate relationship and they were going to live together, but it was going to be fine. And then all of a sudden she started saying, but your father's going to date other people because that's what he does. And she like just went off, and it was even like some sexual stuff because he had told her something about sex with a woman he cheated on. And yes, that was a sign that something wrong was happening. But in the time, my mother was so upset. And then my father got on the phone and was like, I don't know what she's talking about. Everything's fine. And I believed my dad. Like I saw my mother as being the one that was a little crazy because why is she bringing this up to me? Not understanding it was desperation. Not that it was fear in that moment, but it was obviously something that was desperate. So I think one of the signs is looking at the disparity, because my mother was so emotional and so on edge at times and upset. And my father was so like, everything's great, everything's fine. Like it's not in tune at all, right? If it was in tune, then there would, but that's that lack of remorse or empathy and stuff like that. It's,
Yay, coffee.
Hey, I did, I got some coffee. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's early here in California. So yeah. And I mean, one of the things that happens when you do this work and this self-forgiveness and this self-honor work, you attract people in your life who are like that. Like my fiance who just delivered me my coffee. So that's the thing, that's the thing. It's like, I didn't know that disparity meant anything. Like I just saw my dad's happier and everything, and my mom is upset, like signs like that.
That's really great to hear. Well, it's not great. It's great and not great to hear that's something that people can think about and look out for, because it's not something that I would have thought about. So that's really insightful. How did those experiences of you growing up impact on your self-esteem and self-worth? How did it play out?
Yeah, well, I had a bully. Like in 9th grade, I was fine. And then there was a bully in 9th grade that was really pretty devastating to me. And I think it was definitely, because I did not have a secure sense of myself. There was not like home was like a safe place to go, right? It was a place where there was a lot of fighting and a lot of passion and everything. Or, my mom was traveling a lot at that point, so she wasn't even home. You know, they had split up and gotten back together. And when they did, because my father had had left, had just left for another woman about 3 times in their 30-year marriage. And one of the times he left and took all the money, had someone go into the bank account and act as if she was my mother, and took so those kind of things affected me, because we were rather well off, and then these times he would just leave and there'd be nothing. And seeing my mother go through that, I never went without food or anything like that, but yeah, that was that definitely affected us. So I think as far as self-esteem, I think there's an element of just not having that foundation under you, right? So that then when the bully came in, I didn't know how to stand up for myself and just be like, I don't know what I would do now. Obviously now I can see that she must have been going through a lot to have bullied me. Like you don't just come out, you don't pop out mean. As far as self-esteem also, I started overeating, and that was an addiction that I used to have when I was younger. I started overeating when I was about 15. Did some drugs also, I'd say sex was a bit of an addiction. So those were things like to fill myself up, and of course, none of those, especially the boys I dated when I was in high school, they were definitely not like stellar. Like, these are great guys, not terrible, but didn't care for me. So I was with men who didn't care for me. And yeah, I think it really showed up in relationships, certainly when, before I was 20 and stuff like that. I did start to have some nice relationships, except for that one that I talked about when I was 27. And it's funny because I was studying psychology, and I learned that that was classic, like to attract someone who puts you up on a pedestal and then starts tearing you down and controlling you and being violent, is like classic of growing up in a household where there was this like difference between your father and your mother. My father was, the one who was the breadwinner, and he would always tell her, like, he would be enthralled with my mother's creativity, and then he would also put her down at the same time. So yeah, I think it had to do with my self-esteem, probably getting out there when I was younger as an actress. Like I just sometimes wouldn't go for the auditions and stuff like that, because I just didn't have that, just innate sense of safety. I just thought about that, actually, probably because I had for a while like this fear of being visible, which probably, which of course a lot of people that are in our worlds, entrepreneurs and stuff like that, have that fear of visibility. It could be just coming from when you were younger and it wasn't safe. I obviously got over that because I've done my one-woman show all over the world, but it was a process, taking the stage alone and telling my story, and not caring that people are out there. So the good news is that you can absolutely work on your self-esteem and self-love. So much of that was about self-parenting for me, and learning to be the father to myself that I didn't have, like the qualities of strength, and like a fearlessness and stuff like that, and just embodying those things in myself.
You think there was a tipping point? There was a catalyst, something happened where you thought, this isn't how things should be. So like if your self-esteem was not as healthy as it should have been, do you think there was a point when you suddenly thought, actually, I need to work on this?
I don't know if I would have said the word self-esteem, but I do know that after my father killed my mom, and that's when my self-esteem really took a dive, right? Because I felt so damaged. I was really living as a victim for the first couple of years, as far as just closing myself off. I mean, I remember I had this little apartment in Beverly Hills that was stuffed with stuff from my parents' house in Brooklyn. You know, I just couldn't let go. I was feeling so bad about myself. And you know, anybody can get on the bandwagon and be like, yeah, that's horrible, right? Because, you know, what happened to me, people can pretty much say that was horrible. They can, until they see a bigger perspective. I mean, you could still say it was traumatic. And but while I was living in that place, I was also attracting people at my level. So so my friends were living like victims too, to their boss, to their parents, to not the same circumstance, but you know, we were all kind of a posse of people who were thinking about how terrible things were, and you can't find a relationship, and they didn't book this job. And I did have this moment, but I wish I could remember what exactly happened, because it was before my master's degree, that I was like, I do not want to live like a victim anymore. And I wish I could remember the moment, but I was spending a lot of time outdoors. Like, just naturally, I was guided to do these hiking paths in Los Angeles and just spend a lot of time in nature. And so as I started lifting up, and it was probably around the same time I started writing my material down, and then which turned into my show. Those people the people I was hanging out with, like, just went away. Like, they left because the energy wasn't a match anymore. And I started meeting people who were more uptone. You know, I noticed when I was around people who were just like victimy and stuff like that. And it's not to say not, you know, we can be kind to that part of ourselves, and there's a place and a time to feel like that. But then if you stay in it too long, it just turns in on you, and you're not empowered. So that's what happened. I bet it coincides with, it probably coincides with my writing, like getting my shit out of my head and onto the pages, because, I think this is what happened. I was so desperately trying not to be a victim that I was a victim. And then I started writing during my sleepless nights, and I would read the poetry, and I'd read what I wrote, and I would have so much compassion for the person who lived through that, which was me. And it was probably with that then my self-esteem started to come back, and then I realized I wanted more. And for me, honestly, I did not care about not hanging out with those people who were like that. Like, a lot of people don't want to, like, they're afraid to get better because then you'll lose friends. But I got other friends, you know, not so much to judge them, but it wasn't healthy to be with people that were like that. Yeah.
It sounds like the writing was really therapeutic. And, you know, you were talking about inner child work earlier on, which I just think it's so powerful. It's mind blowing when you can allow yourself to step into it and take it on board. So yeah, it sounds like your writing was, you parented yourself, loved yourself through your writing, which allowed you to heal, and then to do the show. Wow.
Yeah, well, the master's program really also then gave me the skills. So I was doing the freeform writing and writing these poems and writing what happened and dramatizing everything. And then when I got into my master's, and they really gave me skills to, like, write out the different parts of myself, you know, my inner child, my inner wisdom, my anger, my grief. That was a way that really helped everything as well. And then, yeah, I mean, the inner child work, I would take a picture out of myself as a little girl and just love on her. And then, you know, say, is there anything that you want to tell me, you know? And she was so wise, that part of me, you know, our inner child's like in there screaming, come on, listen to me. I know, you know, and it was so beautiful. It was like, that part of me just listening to her was just like, let's go out in nature. Let's, you know, don't go out with that person, you know. You know, if we just integrate it, it's all part of us. It's that part of me that's so innocent and sweet is also so connected and so wise.
Yeah. Brenda, what would you say to, sorry.
No, I was going to say that inner child work, I worked a lot with, like, mothering that inner child. And I think that's usually what people do, right? Have the nurturing qualities of the divine feminine. but it took a while for me to realize that I could embrace the masculine, and that was very, very healing for me to be the father to myself.
Mm.
That was really, really, it was very healing, especially for me in the world, like getting out there in the world, having success with my business was embracing that masculine. Okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I remember when I was trying to connect with my inner child, it took me so long. She just wouldn't speak. There was like a complete disconnect.
Oh,
Total
yeah.
disconnect.
Because sometimes they're angry with us
Yeah,
too. Like,
yeah,
why did you make those choices? So that's
yeah,
why I just stay and love that part of you.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
love.
yeah,
And that's why it's also important to have your inner guide there. So that if the inner child comes out and is angry, us, no matter how old we are or whatever, we don't feel upset by that. So you just bring in your inner guide, whatever that is for you, that can just love that part.
Did you, because I know I did my inner child when she was a little kid, but I also did the different times when I experienced the trauma. Did you do that as well? So
Yes,
teenager, young
teenager.
adult.
Uh, you know what? I haven't ever done the stuff with the a young adult. I've done the teenager, which was so powerful. I haven't done the young adults. That would be great for me to do. I can tell there's still something for me to do around that one boyfriend that I had.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that would be interesting to do. Do you know what I did? That is, it's a different spin on this.
Mm.
It was years later. I did like an inner parenting with my inner bully,
Whoa.
because yeah, because I realized that I always identified as the victim. If I was going to identify as one, it was the victim, because my
Mm.
mother, I loved her so much and she was kind and all this stuff, and it's hard to identify as the bully, and the bully in my life was my father. And then I had this huge awareness. It happened to be in a relationship that I was in. Well, it was my ex-wife, and but she said one day, because we both, she was in my master's program with me, and she said that, like, she identified as the bully and I identified as the victim, like when we got conscious about it. And for her, it was because her father was the one who had power in the relationship with her mother when they were younger. And then one day I was like very upset with her for something. I thought that she didn't act with empathy or something like that. And I just closed my heart down. And that was my thing. I just closed my heart down when I was upset. And she said to me, you're being abusive. And I flipped out. I've never actually, I don't know if I've told this story before. In public, I flipped out. I was so angry that she could say it. So it was way bigger than the moment. So I had to know it was about something else. And that's when I came to, like, oh my God, I have totally denied that part of myself, put it on other people because I judged it so badly. But it is kind of being a bully if you just shut your heart down. You're just like, well, that's it. And I think a lot of people who identify as a victim unconsciously, or because a victim can feel like they're still a good person usually, whereas a bully doesn't.
Yeah.
Um, I did a 30-day process with my inner bully that I had always denied. And it was incredible to just love this part, because that's how we can get rid of that part. Because I
Yeah.
used to be, so that was my thing. I could be a bully to myself because, it shows up somewhere, or I would just shut my heart down in relationships. And then I had remorse because I'm like, oh my God, that must be so hard for someone else. And then I loved that part. So I didn't have to check myself anymore like that.
Wow, that's so insightful. And yeah, I mean, there's a big difference, isn't there, between the bully and the victim, and how we perceive a victim and how we perceive a bully. They're very, very different, completely different energy.
Well, I never thought of shutting down my heart to someone as a bully energy, right?
Yeah,
Because I thought it was internal, but I could see, like, it's that energy thing of, like, someone's trying to talk to you and you're just vacant,
yeah, yeah,
right? So that's not healthy for the person doing it
yeah,
either, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, absolutely. It would just be like a brick wall, wouldn't it? It would just be completely different.
Right.
Completely.
It was shocking to me to realize that that was me. And that was a behavior my dad had when he couldn't, well, certainly with me, when he couldn't reach me as a teenager, he just shut down. And I'm like, holy shit, I took that on. Like, I didn't know. And my goal is to be awakened and to to understand all these different parts of myself. So, and all the time when, you know, a lot of people beat themselves up, and it's about, okay, beat yourself up for a half a second for not knowing better, because, you know, if you've hurt people, that's healthy to know that you have done that, and then love yourself with that love, you know.
Mm. Brenda, what would you say to someone who's struggling with forgiveness, who's in that space, who's still got the baseball bat?
Well, the first thing I would say is it is hurting you. Just know that. Know that it's an inside job. Know that you don't ever have to condone what the person did. I do not condone that my father killed my mother, but it's hurting you. Do it for yourself. Know that that anger. See, I think people have it because they don't have a boundary. So they feel like if they let that guard down and they're not so angry, that anger serves to set boundaries if someone is still in your life, you know, so that you don't answer the call and stuff like that. It serves as a boundary, but that hardness turns in on itself. So just know that it is for you. You're not condoning what they do. And if sometimes the word of forgiveness trips people up, just think of it as releasing the anger that is inside of you. And that anger causes all kinds of things. It causes a lack of intimacy. It can cause health challenges. It can lead to addictions because you don't want to deal with it. And I do believe it always affects us, because a lot of people are like, well, I don't give a shit because the person's not in my life, or they don't even say it like that. I hear it. I mean, I've helped hundreds of clients. You think you are compartmentalizing and you are going on with your life. So what's the big deal that you have this anger there? We are holistic beings, so that will come out in some way. Even if it's stealing your joy, giving you an inability to trust, someone else comes into your life and all of a sudden you're triggered and you don't know why, but they remind you of the person or the incident, it will show up. I have a quick story. My aunt who married my father, I was so angry at her, right? And I've done my show all over the world, right? So half the people are so angry at my father and half are just as angry, if not more, at my aunt for marrying my father after he kills her. And it's all based on your experiences and the lens of which, you look at life through. So anyway, with my aunt, I didn't love her so fiercely like I loved my dad. So I didn't have the impetus to really forgive her. I was like, I did the spiritual bypass. Well, she's not in my life. And I teach this. I've been teaching that you can't just compartmentalize. She was in another state. Then my father died. I was like, whatever. Well, of course, someone showed up in my life that reminded me of her a lot. And I was always triggered by this person. And I only realized afterwards it's because they had some similar qualities and stuff like that. Okay. But besides that, I don't know, might have been 2018 or something like that. My aunt who I'm close with, not the one that married my father, calls me and says that my aunt died. I remember I was in the car going to a conference or coming back from LA to San Diego or something like that. And I hear that she died and I'm like, whatever. So compassionate that I am, the forgiveness queen. And so because I'm like, what, she's not in my life, blah, 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 even though, there's a separation in the family, everything like that. And I get off the phone and all of a sudden my mother energetically comes to me from the other side and she's so loving. And my mother, I see her welcoming her sister to the other side, like loving arms, and I started sobbing and I realized that I had this hardness in my heart completely against my aunt for, 15, 20 years that I didn't need to have there. And what it did is it just it opened my throat. It just opened my energy up, So it's even subtle if you don't think, my goal is always to be more loving, to be able to have more of a capacity to trust my instincts, to have more joy. So that's another way. So for those people who are don't know how to forgive or don't want to, just know it's for you. Oh, and the other thing is, so you have to have a healthy boundary, right? I took my dad to court for wrongful death. And what was the other thing? a healthy boundary. If you're having a problem, oh my God, it just completely left my head.
It'll come back. It'll
It'll
come back.
come back.
It'll
It'll,
come back.
it'll come back. Yep. Yes. Well, it will come back or it won't right now. But let's see, setting a healthy boundary, and now it's gone. It's just gone.
That's okay. It's all good. It wasn't meant to be. It's all good.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know you do a lot of work, and you've touched on it slightly, a lot of work with people around their story and their experiences.
Yes. I have focused primarily on that since like 2014, but I always sneak in my healing stuff and my forgiveness stuff in between because that's what's most important to me. But it just so happens that the people who I'm working on their stories, so it's about 80% entrepreneurs right now, 20% performers, because it's, it started with me having this successful one-person show. And then, of course, entrepreneurs have to tell their story. And then, coaches say, tell your vulnerable story. But I know that if you tell your vulnerable story that you've tried to compartmentalize your entire life, then you're going to feel like shit. You're going to want to hide. And it's not going to land how you want it to. And you don't want to go back to just telling the business story, because then you won't stand out and then you won't make as much of an impact. I was very depressed after the first time I did my show. Like, people would laugh and people would cry, and then I'd go home and be miserable. That's why I went for my master's in spiritual psychology to figure out what was going on. So because I'm so vocal about my story, I have the honor of hearing what everyone's been through, like you, I'm sure, here. Like, it's shocking. Like, you hear those statistics, it's shocking. So many of my clients were working with their stories on, sexual abuse from when they were kids. I mean, there's been torture, there's been like suicides in the family, people who've tried to kill themselves. There's been people who have, had drug addictions and they've just gotten through it. Like, I am so honored that I get to hold a space for these people who are still searching or going through, like you said, it's a journey, right? So they're on the way to the other side of what their life has been. So I help them identify the patterns of their life so that we come up with the real message and then tie it to their business. And then in the last few years alone, I've actually produced events where my clients got on stage in with 5 to 10 minute storytelling events. Over 200 of them. So it's been really amazing, and it's always with the goal of healing and impact. And then the side note is that they're also attracting their ideal clients, because they're getting to know them, who they are as a person versus just their business.
It's a really nice space to be in as well, isn't it? Because you know that you're helping those people with their stories, who are then going to help other people.
Exactly. That's what's so exciting to me, because with my message is about forgiveness, but not about those other topics. So then there was one woman who never said the word suicide. Her mom had committed suicide about 10 years before. She was devastated by it, and she came to my class. She's a businesswoman and sold essential oils and stuff like that, and went into that because she believed it was the drugs that had an effect on her mother, right? In the class, she owned the word. And then right before the class and then the showcase, she actually did her 8-minute piece for one of her mom's friends. And it was like, she described it, how, they were crying together, and how powerful it was to bring her mom to life and own this word and what happened, so that she wasn't devastated every time she said. It was so brilliant, so those are the kind of stories, like, people own what happened, because my process is very much healing while you're sharing. Oh, and the other thing is to get the skills, right? It's not going to land if you're all emotional and you don't have the skills to tell the story. So, I have freaking 10,000 hours on stage in addition to all the master classes and stuff like that. So it's really exciting. It's really exciting for me to be able to help people with that.
Yeah, and it's a real skill. It's a real skill to be able to help someone to find their story and to be able to express it in a way that they feel safe. Yes.
So they feel safe, because also, having been on stages, before I was ready, probably, but I would never say don't just do it, because I learned so much from that. Like, I started to heal. But yeah, I don't I know there's a way for you to take the stage and be prepared, because there's the thing of you knowing how to tell your story and your emotions and taking care of yourself. And then there's the questions people have for you and things like that. And you want to be prepared so that you are leading that. You're not like, you're not reactionary to people's questions and stuff like that. Like last night, even after the speaking event, someone came up to me after and was asking me question after question after question about the details of my story. And I was able to answer them with absolutely no emotional upset for myself, and also not answer everything if I didn't want to. So there's a skill to that as well when we're sharing our emotional stories,
Yeah, absolutely. Brenda, how can people find you, reach out to you?
Facebook is my main social media platform. I have a free group called Soul Story Tribe. And I know this is live, so I'll just mention today's literally the last day. If you're watching this live, it is July 7th, 2023. I'm doing a 30-day forgiveness program called Phoenix Rising, and today is the last day to join it. So I just wanted to mention that because the timing was so incredible.
I saw it. I shared it the other day, and I was just like blown away. Wow, yeah, incredible.
I channeled that. So yeah, so Facebook, and then I have a free gift also for people if they reach out. We'll put a link in on the 5 top reasons to never forgive and why you must. So I have an e-course on that. Yeah,
awesome. Brenda, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know we've gone longer than we were meant to, but I just love talking to you. I could still keep talking to you because I think what you've got to share can help so many people, and you've been on such a powerful journey and have such a powerful story and can own it. And I think forgiveness is where a lot of people get stuck. You just get stuck in it.
Yeah, and it's because nobody teaches you how. They say do it, it's good for you, but they don't tell you how. And then you think it's condoning something. So that's what I'll leave everyone with. It's like, it is not condoning anything. Have a healthy boundary and learn, you can learn what that is. Ask me questions about that, so that you can actually just let go of that person. I don't say don't forget, but you want to somehow forget like the emotional, the energy of your body, so that you're free of it. Yeah.
That's a good note to finish on. Brenda, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me and for this incredibly powerful series.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time. Take care.